Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to a very special shir as we prepare for the High Holy Days, Yom Kippur, which is coming up Sunday night. Tonight's shir is entitled The Holiness of Your Sins. And what I would like to do in the time that we have is to be able to share with you a fresh insight into how it is that the experiences that we have gone through of our past, the misdeeds, the transgressions, the faults, the errors, can actually be the channeled for us to be able to rise and to achieve greatness in our lives. Guilt is something that we all live with, for better or for worse. It's part of the psyche of humankind, and certainly it's the part of the psyche of being Jewish. In fact, they say that if a Jew doesn't feel guilty, he blames himself. So guilt is interwoven into the fabric of who we are as a nation and as individuals. In fact, they tell the story about a kosher restaurant. You know, Jews love to complain. So this waiter was walking around and everyone was calling over from table to table. Everyone was complaining about something. So he went over to them and he used to tell the clients in the restaurant, used to say to them, "Is anything okay?" That's the psyche, that we come from, that we believe that everything's wrong, we're terrible, right? We're not getting anywhere, we're not accomplishing, we're not succeeding. What's the point of trying? And we have this voice in our head which seems to eat away at our energy, sapping all our strength, not enabling us to be able to channel and to be able to tap into the reservoirs of potential that each and every one of us has inside us. So let me share with you a couple of ideas that I think will be able to enlighten us and give us inspiration as we head towards the High Holy Days of Yom Kippur. So we know that at every service across the 5 services of Yom Kippur, the centerpiece is the vidoi. The vidoi means the confession. We are able to communally express our chata'im, our sins, our transgressions, our misdeeds, our foibles. And we do it in a very unique way. If you think about it, it's very, very different to every other nation. Think about the Catholics, the way that they confess. They go into a confession box. I have to tell you that actually somebody came to see me the other day from a different faith. And he knew that it was the Day of Atonement was up and coming. And he heard it's the Day of Forgiveness. Or for Day of Forgiving. So he said, I want to know how much. And I said to him, I don't understand what you're talking about. He says, I know it's your festival, the festival of giving, forgiving. It's the festival for giving. So I said, no, you can't pay to be forgiven. You actually have to exert yourself. You have to put in effort. You have to approach somebody. You have to have the courage to face up to your demons. He said, that's very different. And I'm not used to anything like that. So we don't go into a confession box and quietly confess our sins. Quite the opposite. What do? With all the pomp and ceremony, in the public gaze, we stand there and we sing out loud. Ay, 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 ay. Tatanu avinu pashanu kishinu oref. Right? We've sinned. Right? We've made transgressions. Right? Gazalnu. Right? Dibarnu dofi. We've robbed. We've spoken in vain. Right? Chatted unnecessarily. The list goes on and on. So the obvious question, and it's baffling, I'm sure, for each and every one of us, is it sounds the exact opposite of a sincere, contrite confession, right? Imagine somebody came into shul and he says, ay, 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 I've stolen 50,000 pounds from my neighbor's house, ay, ay, ay. You'd say, that's not a confession. That's a joke. That's brazenness. You're a disgrace. How can you carry on like that? Making a joke out of something that is meant to be so sincere, right? With such integrity and honesty, right? How can you make light of such matters of confession and of apology and forgiveness? But that's what we seem to do. Again, we come to confession, we stand up and we publicly declare, right, that we have done all these transgressions over the last year. Why is it that we would do such a strange thing, right? Right? Imagine you go to your friend and you say, ay, 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 I smashed your car when I was reversing, and I smashed your window, and I spoke Lashon Hara about you. He's not going to be forgiving, right? He's going to be more angry, more upset, right? It's going to create a greater distance between you and him. So what is the answer? And the answer, in fact, comes from the most unlikely source, and that is that the vidoy, the confession, comes from in the Torah in relation to a confession that is made in regards to tithing. Twice in 7 years, we are expected to stand in front of God and speak about, and instead of speaking of wrongdoing or sins, we are expected in this confession, this vidoy, to declare our greatness, to compliment ourselves in the eyes and presence of God, right? So could we imagine such a thing after wrongdoing, that we stand in front of our friend, our spouse, our children, our partner, right? And we're going to say, all the terror, we're going to say how great we are, and that's my confession. It's even more baffling. They'll think we're mad. So let me share with you a couple of points which I think will shed light on this, and it will give us a completely new perspective when it comes to what does it mean to confess, and what does it mean, how we meant to approach guilt as Jews, right? It's something we struggle with, right? And they say a well-balanced Jew is somebody who's got a chip on both shoulders. How do we approach guilt, right? Is guilt something good or bad, right? We can have this heaviness in our lives, constantly carrying around this burden of all the terrible things we've done, the angst, the pain, right? And we can live with this regret, right? And have recriminations all of our lives about the way we've conducted ourselves. What are we meant to do with guilt? So the answer is that when it comes to this twice in 7 year confession, that's where the original vidoy comes from, confession with ties. The idea is that it is only when we are, listen to this, it is only when we are able to look in the mirror and to express and to admit and to recognize our personal greatness, when we are able to recognize our capabilities, our qualities, right? What we could achieve in life, then we are in a position to turn around and look at ourselves and to also recognize and to admit our failings, our fallibilities, our foibles. You can't have one without the other. If we just go through life beating ourselves up, telling ourselves how terrible we are, and living with this angst about the terrible things and the terrible person I am, I'm not going to grow. I'm not going to be free. I'm not going to accomplish and achieve. I'm going to keep saying to myself, you're a terrible person. You're a terrible friend, a terrible husband, a terrible wife, a terrible business partner, a terrible Jew. You'll go through your life living wallowing in self-pity, with low self-esteem, saying to yourself, I can't be anything. I'm a nobody. I'm a bad Jew. So often I meet people, and the first thing they say to me is, I'm not particularly religious, Rabbi. I'm a terrible Jew. Already they have carried out a character assassination on themselves, and they have convicted themselves, found themselves guilty, and written themselves off in terms of their character, the potential, the latent potential that they have to accomplish and to achieve greatness in life, to be what they are capable of. So when we are talking and we are saying this confession on the Yom Kippur, the first thing, we sing it with a spring in our step, because whilst we are recognizing our failings, first we sing. First, we are recognizing, we look in that mirror and we look at who we are and we say, I know that I am capable of so much more. The Almighty made me in his likeness. I'm made B'Tselem Elokim. If I'm made in his image, the possibilities that I can achieve in life are endless. And I know that this was not becoming. In fact, listen to this. We say in the confession, V'loi shava lanu, right? Simply speaking, what that means is that what we did was not worth it. In other words, we look back at all the arguments, right? The errors of our ways, the things that we shouldn't have done, and 99% of the time, we regret them immediately. We say we at the time, we thought it was, we saw it as this was the be all and end all, and we were eaten up. We had to do it. We felt it was so important and it was worth it. It was a short-term gain for a long-term loss. And when we reflect afterwards, what do we say to ourselves? I can't believe I did it. It so wasn't worth it, right? But there is another, that's the first explanation of saying V'lo shava lanu in the confession, that it wasn't worth it. We recognize that whatever joy, whatever satisfaction, whatever self-gratification we had from that error, that misdeed, right? Whatever we ate that we shouldn't have, that lashon hara, juicy lashon hara we spoke that we shouldn't have, we recognize it wasn't worth it. But the second explanation, the second take of V'lo shava lanu is even more compelling. You know what it means? It means I'm looking in the mirror at my greatness. And when I recognize my greatness, I realize V'lo shava, meaning it wasn't worth me doing it. In other words, it was beneath me. I recognize my greatness, who I am. How could I have sullied myself? So demeaning, so beneath me to behave in such a lowly fashion. That's the second explanation. And that is precisely what we need to do when we say a confession. We look in the mirror, we go through the process of introspection when it comes to the High Holy Days and Yom Kippur in particular, and we are able first and foremost to see our capabilities, to see how much more we can achieve, accomplish, be in life. And then we say, recognizing who we can be, then these actions, these transgressions, they're not fitting of me. It's beneath me. And therefore, I'm prepared to distance myself. That's what really confession is all about. So the remorse that we have is the springboard in our lives for renewal. But if we have a message that I'm a terrible Jew, I'm a bad Jew, then it will lead us with apathy and we'll stick wallowing in self-pity about the bad habits. And it's exceptionally unhealthy. There's an incredible story I want to share with you, and that is regarding a couple that went on the honeymoon in 1940. Their names were Walter and Grace. They went away on it was 1940. There wasn't many places that you could go. It was the time of the war. So they went away for 3 nights and 3 days. They were in America. They went away to this cabin in this wasteland. And they decided they'd be able to get away, have some time together after their wedding. And the first night, they're laying in bed, and all of a sudden they hear this gnawing, this tapping sound on the roof. And it's a woodpecker. And the whole night, the first night of their wedding, all they hear is this tapping of the woodpecker. They can't sleep the whole night. They're exhausted. The next night, they go to bed and they think, okay, one night, but at least the next night we'll be able to get some rest, get some sleep, relax. They get into bed, there's more tapping. And all of a sudden, that tapping is no more because the woodpecker has tapped and banged and made a hole all the way through the cabin. So they thought at least that's the worst is behind us. Now we'll be able to enjoy the honeymoon. The woodpecker's done his business and is gone. Then it rained. And of course, the rain came cascading into their wooden cabin. So they got drenched. And it went from bad to worse. After the third night, they said, fine, okay, we've had enough. The woodpecker, the rain, we're going home. They had 3 nights, 3 days. And on their way home, Grace turned to Walter and she said to him that, you know, in reality, we had a great time. We spent quality time together. All we have to do is figure out how we are going to look at it, how we are going to reframe it, as despite this distraction, that we had great time together. So she said, you're a cartoonist, Walter. That's your profession. So let's use our experience and create a cartoon. And that is precisely what Walter did with Grace's help. They created, from their negative experience of this woodpecker that banged away the whole of their honeymoon, they created a cartoon. And that's how Woody the Woodpecker was born. And Woody the Woodpecker, of course, brought them great fortune and success. It was a great cartoon by Walt Disney. And 50 years later, on their wedding anniversary, they were interviewed on TV and they were asked about, the highlights and, what was the greatest experiences, the greatest moment in their lives. And without missing a beat, they both said that the greatest moment in their lives was that night in that cabin when that woodpecker was drilling away into their cabin. Because it was precisely at that moment, which seemed sheer living hell, that they were able, retrospectively, that was the moment that sowed the seeds for their great success and fortune in life and gave them a wonderful, wonderful next 50 years. So therefore, it's very much like that when we are singing the vidoi, the confession, we are able to sing because we are able to recognize that now we have recognized on the one hand our potential. And we are able at the same time, when we say confession, to recognize what is holding us back. We are able to push aside those obstacles, those hurdles that are holding us back in life, preventing us from accomplishing and achieving what we want to. Then we are able to be in a jubilant mood because we know that we can move forward uninhibited from any of these distractions and these things that have held us back, these misdeeds and transgressions. It's funny that we find in the Talmud a very similar idea, and this is actually where it comes from. The Gemara Yuma says as follows. Reish Lakish says that when a Jew repents, if a person sincerely regrets their misdeeds, then, and he does so out of love for God, then those past misdeeds, those sins, those transgressions, they become transformed from negatives, from sins, from things that count against us, to being mitzvot. That's astounding. What was the negative and would count against the person and they'd be punished for it, it now becomes their cause for their reward. It becomes transformed into mitzvot. And how can that be, you may wonder? And the answer is because of precisely what we have said, friends, because the fall is the cause of my rise. My sins, am able to see retrospectively as something that is so holy, so sacred, because I am able to channel that negative experience retrospectively and use it to bring me closer to the Almighty, to strengthen my Jewish identity, to give me the newfound resolve to be a better person. So when I look back, where did it come from? Where did it start? What was the motivation? It was those errors, those mistakes. It's like, for example, if you're trying to go up a ladder, you're never going to go straight up. You always have to push down on the rungs of the ladder, and it's the pushing down which propels you up. So therefore, it is precisely with the misdeeds, the transgressions, when we say that confession, when we look back at our lives, we look back at the last year, and there's always things that we all have regrets for, but we're able to put them in perspective, to learn from our mistakes and to regret them and to have the resolve and the convictions to be able never to repeat them and to try to be a better person and to channel that newfound energy towards a closer relationship with our family, with our friends, with our spouses, and with the Almighty. Winston Churchill is somebody that we've all heard of. Winston Churchill is renowned for his speeches. He was a great, perhaps one of the great demagogues. He was a great speaker, erudite. Every syllable, every word was polished. He was, compelling. Even today, he is the master when it comes to speech and speeches. And yet, not many people know that when he was a child, he struggled to speak. In fact, it is known that he had a stutter. Winston Churchill grew up and he had a terrible lisp and he had a stutter. Two speech impediments the great Winston Churchill had all the way in his teens till he became an adult. And Winston Churchill was determined that he would be able to speak, even back then, without those impediments. And he wrote out speeches because he needed to give speeches. And he decided that he would find a method to be able to circumvent and to get round these hurdles, these obstacles, these speech impediments, so that it would not hold him back, so that he'd be able to be a great speaker. What did he do? Listen to this. Winston Churchill decided, rather than saying long sentences, Winston Churchill always spoke in short sentences. That was technique number one. And technique number two is that he implemented dramatic pauses, silences at key moments in his speech, which enabled him to have the time and the ability to overcome the speech impediments that he was struggling with. It was through those two devices that he was able to transform himself from having an impediment and not being able to speak and being a bad speaker to being one of the greatest orators and speakers that ever lived. That is precisely what we are talking about. The gift that we have with Yom Kippur, that gift, an oasis in time, friends, for us to consider, to reflect, to take a long, hard look at ourselves. Guilt is important, but it has to be balanced. And the counterweight to the guilt is to be able to see the greatness. And when we see the greatness and we see afterwards the guilt, the mistakes, the misdeeds, we are able then to regret those mistakes, to have the resolve that we do not want to ever repeat those mistakes, and that will propel us to enabling us and facilitating us to go on to achieve true greatness in our lives. May we all have the strength of character, the strength of our convictions, the courage to be able, through this Yom Kippur, to have a long, hard look at ourselves, to be able to learn from our mistakes of the past, to be able to tap into that wellspring that we each have of our latent potential, our achievements, our greatness, which awaits each and every one of us. And please God, we will be able to become new, greater, better people, living more fulfilling, successful, accomplished Jewish lives. And in that way, we will all merit to be written in the book of life and health and happiness. Wishing you all well over the fast. Gemar Chatima Tova. All the best. Take care.